It's around this time of year, my mind is usually focused on death. Plenty of reasons for this. One, well, the obvious one, it's October, the end of October, Halloween, kind of drifts into All Hallows, All Saints Day, Day of the Dead, that kind of thing. As a consequence of my thoughts mainly focusing on death, around November specifically, I tend to think about war. And the reason for this, most one, is that there's Remembrance Day in Canada around November 11th, a day which we honor those who have died in war and who have served their country. My family has had a long history of being in the military. In fact, my generation is on both sides of my family, through my mother's side and through my father's side. I'm the first generation that hasn't had a member of my generation, my cousins, that has not entered into the military. As far back as we can go, on both sides, as far back as we can go, my family has always been involved somehow with being in the military. It's a rather sobering time of year for me, November, merely due to the fact that while I'm thinking about, the darker aspects of life, i.e. it ending, as well as remembrances of those members of my family who have fought and served and in a lot of cases died for the thing that they thought they were doing for whoever they were fighting for, what country they felt that they were serving. All in all, for the last 25 years of my life, November has been a reflective month for me. It's not something I like doing, but I try to make space in my thinking for just all of the horrible things that occur during things like war, the darkest aspects of humanity, the worst things that we have seemingly ever accomplished, as well as the most atrocious things that humanity has ever had to endure, is while we have been embroiled in or as a consequence of war. One could argue natural disasters are just trying to survive through periods of ice ages, yes, although that does seem rather distant. There's something about war that stings a bit more. It's that old saying, you do it to yourself, and that's what really hurts. This year, this November, has been different. There has been these thoughts about war and what we've had to endure, and my family serving, and those that do serve, and death, and the ending of young life, and just the ending of life in general. But the volume of it this November has been turned down a noticeable amount. This November, for some reason, my mind has been thinking about bugs. Well, to be specific, it's been thinking about butterflies. The reasons for this, I'm not too sure. It very well, most probably, definitely has something to do, with the birth of my daughter and me being a new dad, and perhaps my mind has shifted a bit to, let's just say, the less macabre aspects of existence and wants to focus instead on some of the more beautiful things that we can experience. But butterflies, just like their very nature, have been fluttering in and out of my thoughts very regularly over the last few weeks. And in particular, a certain memory that I have with an experience involving butterflies. It's just under a decade ago that in the middle of winter, I decided to visit my mother, who lived in central Mexico. I mentioned at several points throughout my episodes that I used to head down to Mexico to visit her, and I would spend a great deal of time down there. It was kind of like a second home, a city specifically in the state of Michoacan called Morelia. And if there's one thing that Morelia is a bit famous for, something that they take a great deal of pride in is the fact that they are somewhat close to where the monarch butterfly ends its migration during the colder months of the year, waiting for a few months before it starts to get warmer, wherein they will head back north. I hope everybody is familiar with the incredible migration that monarch butterflies do each and every year. It's astounding. It's beyond a doubt one of the most fascinating, interesting, just spectacular natural phenomenon in the entire world. If you're unfamiliar with this, I'll be very brief. In a nutshell, there's a species of butterfly called the monarch butterfly. They are the only species of butterfly to do this, which also makes it pretty incredible. From as far south as central Mexico, this place that I'm talking about, they are pine oak forests in the Mexican state of Michoacan. Every spring, these monarch butterflies set out and begin to migrate northward all the way up to southern Canada, where while it's hot, they feed, they flutter, they lay their eggs. It is a very long journey. It takes about 4 generations of monarchs to make that northern migration. And then when the temperature starts to go down in autumn, then the butterflies start making their way back south. The distances are just staggering. They travel about close to 5,000 kilometers, so about 3,000 miles round trip. And again, it takes generations of them to do this. For those who are unaware, and I know some of you know if you've listened to my older episodes, I love butterflies. Even just like talking about them, I get excited. It's something about them is so magical to me. And the monarchs are a very special kind of butterfly. So I've been going down to Morelia for years and years and years and years. But then one year I was like, you know what? I have to see the monarchs. I'm there in the winter. They're going to be there. I have to do this thing. And so I decided to make the journey. Now it's not just as easy as, walking to these places. Not even just like driving a bit out of the city to get to where they are. You have to go to a very specific place. And it's about a 2.5, if I recall, 2.5, 3-hour drive from the city of Morelia itself. And once you get there, again, it's not just like you get out of the car in the parking lot and you're surrounded by monarch butterflies. It's one of those things where you actually have to hike to get there. And I knew this going in. I knew it was going to be a trip. It's basically a full day. But from everybody that I've heard, my mother included, and her friend, the person that was taking us to this preserve, who'd been there many, many times, it's just one of the most magical things. You get to this specific spot where the monarchs, they tend to congregate, these pine oak forests, and you're just surrounded by flying monarch butterflies. And it's mind-boggling, and people just say it's the most beautiful thing ever. And I had to do it. I absolutely had to see it. It was on our way there, though, in the car. It really takes a long time to drive. That things were not adding up in our favor. It was sunny when we left Morelia, but as we got closer to this preserve in central Mexico, it started to cloud over. And the cloud continued to get even more cloudier. It wasn't raining, but there wasn't a ton of sun. And once we got to the nature preserve and we began a hike, and this hike, by the time we would get to our destination, it's about an 1.5-hour hike. It's nearly a 2-hour hike. It goes up, it goes down. It's not on any kind of a paved surface. It's not a terribly difficult hike, but it is not an easy hike either. And in fact, there were people that were definitely hurt doing the hike or rolled their ankles while we were walking. And I kind of felt bad for them, but just kept walking. And there were quite a few people there that day. There's always people. When the monarchs are there, there's tons of people that want to see them, and myself was included. But as we were walking, the sun was behind the clouds, and this was not a good thing. And my guide, my mother's friend, who for a long time had been very excited and had been very talkative, I kind of noticed as we made our way to our final destination, he was quite quiet. And I think he kind of knew what was going to happen. And what happened was a great disappointment for me. The temperature was not great. It was kind of cold. The sun wasn't out. And when we did get to the spot, indeed, there were millions of butterflies, but they were all couched within the branches and the pine needles and the trees, and they were far, far away. And it just looked like, when you looked up, it was kind of impressive. Just these giant bunches, but they were black. They weren't orange like a monarch butterfly. They were all of the butterflies, to keep warm, they were just kind of closed up in and amongst each other and just waiting until it would be sunny again when they would then start flying about. But that specific day that we were there was a great disappointment. The monarchs weren't doing much of anything. It had taken close to 5 hours from starting the journey to getting to this specific spot to see the monarchs. And the monarchs, due to the weather, were certainly not cooperating at all. And we just kind of waited around for about an hour, hoping maybe the clouds would clear and we'd get some sun and the monarchs would do that thing and I'd have that great, majestic moment. But as the minutes kept ticking away, it became very apparent that they probably weren't. And I decided to steal myself away from the group that I was traveling with. And I was disappointed. I kind of went away on my own for a little bit to find a small little trail that I was going to go down myself and just kind of be alone for a little bit. Because I just kind of felt like being alone for a little bit. I was, again, very excited and extremely disappointed. However, something of note was that due to the fact that the butterflies spend a great deal of time here, they live in this forest and they die there. When you were walking to the spot where the monarchs are, you see a lot of the dead bodies, the carcasses of the monarch butterflies on the ground, on the hiking trails. And so you can see in their brilliance, you see these freshly dead monarchs. And you can look at them and they are quite stunning. So I was making my way down this trail on my own. I told the people that I was traveling with I'll be back in like half an hour. I just want to just explore on my own for a little bit. Just kind of making my way, probably kicking rocks as I go. And then I found this spot underneath a grouping of trees in which I would look up, and there were the large bundles of monarchs that just weren't doing anything, just trying to keep warm. So I just kind of went and sat underneath this grouping of trees. And I brought my eyes, which had been looking up into the trees themselves, just to see these thousands and thousands and thousands of inactive monarch butterflies. And then my eyes came back down to the ground that I was sitting on, which was just littered with the bodies of newly deceased monarch butterflies. There were thousands of them, just everywhere, all around me. It was impressive in its own somewhat. Ghastly is not the right word. It's just something so beautiful and so fragile, just littered everywhere. And there are signs all the way on the trails and when you get out of the parking lot to try and go to see the monarch butterflies. No tocar, no touching, don't even touch the dead ones on the ground. But there's just so many of them that I had to. And I just started slowly picking up these butterfly corpses in my hands. I probably had about 20 of them in my hands. And while I was staring at them in my hands, I had a very strong intuition, one that was just so pristine and precise. The thought that these now lifeless individual lifespans, whose bodies I now hold in my hands, all of these butterflies had already been here before. That their journey, the great migration that they do every year, they don't do it just once. They've always been doing it over and over and over again. Nothing could be more true to me in that moment. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and you are listening to What Magic Is This podcast? A podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. In this episode, we will be exploring past lives and reincarnation. All right, so I know what some of you are probably thinking. You're thinking to yourself, Doug, this is the second time in 5 episodes that you've told a story where you're out hiking, you're out going for a walk, and then you decide to go on your own, and then something miraculous happens, or you have a moment of realization, or an angel talks to you, or something. What's with these stories? They're starting to sound pretty similar. Are you just making these up? Is this some kind of fabulation on your end there, bud? The answer to that is no. I like hiking. I like walking. I go for lots of walks. In fact, I think that walking by yourself and going for long walks, strange things happen. The magic happens when you get out on your own. You go places alone. Probably some of you listening should go for more walks, truly. Anyhow, best not to start this episode by chiding my listeners. Allow me to continue with something that I mentioned a little bit earlier on in this episode, and I know we're nearly 20 minutes in here and been doing a lot of talking about not the subject, but I'm unfurling a kind of story here. But yes, I've been kind of amused with the fact that for most of my magical life, or at least the last 15 years of it, I've been more than enamored with what happens after one dies. The necromancy, the nigromancy, the kind of talking to spirits and interacting with spirits that could very potentially be those who have crossed over to the other side. This was basically my wheelhouse for the most part. It's where I situated myself and I felt most comfortable, and that's kind of been flipped on its head now. It's not that, when one has a child or a baby that, that stuff just seems too dark, so I just have to abandon it. No, what's just happening is that I'm noticing some really interesting things. I am taking part in watching the magical process of a nascent consciousness or spirit right before my very eyes, and it's very wonderful and it's very beautiful. And so I've been down a bit of a rabbit hole recently, because to go along with this fascination that I have with necromancy and spirits of the dead, there's something else. There's this other little avenue, and one in which I haven't spent a lot of time researching. I was familiar with it, familiar with the ideas of the things that I'm going to be discussing today. I had a passing fascination with the idea of past life regression via things like hypnosis and meditation. I'd read a book or two in the past, but it wasn't really a thing that I devoted a lot of my attention to. There were always more interesting things. There were always flashier, magical subjects in which I wanted to devote my time. I never really went deep. But now, talking here in the autumn of 2025, I have to say I have gone oh so deep. I'm learning things about myself as well. I'm trying to think, why is it it's taken me so long to be in some capacity interested in the idea of past lives and in the idea of reincarnation. And for the most part, It's what I said earlier. It's not that flashy. And the revelations that one can have when one looks into this sort of thing are somewhat personal. But no matter which way one tries to look at this kind of thing, and one of the reasons that I'm sharing it with you all now at this period in time is because the implications and the information itself about past lives and reincarnation are mind-boggling. But I will tack this on here. They're quietly mind-boggling. Probably one of the reasons, again, that I did not really fully go deep into this stuff earlier in my life. The mind will boggle. Quietly. You yourself listening, though, know what I'm talking about. I would hope each and every one of you are in some way, in some capacity, familiar with the idea of past lives and reincarnation. Let's deal with the first one, past lives. That there are people, for the most part, usually they will be children, that seem to remember some insane details or to have the capacity to share aspects of a life that belonged to somebody before they were born. How could something like this happen? Well, that leads into the second part of the title of this episode, which is reincarnation, the idea that we ourselves, and perhaps, probably, other creatures, other spirits, once we pass on, that is, once we die, that sometimes, somehow, maybe not all the time, we're not too sure, but the consciousness that we have now, that we have in this waking world, somehow gets put into a newer consciousness. Something or someone. Reborn. Most of you might be like, okay, I know that. Yep, very, very cool. Still kind of boring, Doug. Like you say, not too flashy. Allow me to just take a moment here to just feed you something, because I know we're 22 minutes into this episode, and you're like, all right, kind of boring. Lots of personal tales there, Doug. Get to it. Let's talk about birthmarks. Really weird, very interesting aspect of this stuff that I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit further on up the line. But there are instances where people will mark the bodies of deceased loved ones with a kind of a charcoal or from grease from a pot on the deceased body before whatever they're going to do to get rid of the body, bury it, or sometimes cremate it, that sort of thing, in hopes that somebody born into the family a bit later on will have a birthmark in the place where the deceased person, mind you, has had a mark put on them. And what's nutty, quietly mind-boggling, is that in many cultures, this happens, and people within the families are born with birthmarks in these areas, in these exact areas. Make no mistake about it. It's not one of those things where they like spray paint somebody's entire leg and then they're like, there was a birthmark on the leg of this baby, which marks the corpse of my uncle. No, these are small marks put on the body, and then a child is born with a birthmark in the exact spot. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? Bit of necromancy there, kind of, kind of magic that would be pretty unfamiliar to most of us here in the West, but in places like Thailand, India, Tibet, China, Mongolia, Japan, Myanmar, this is something that people do. They're called experimental birthmarks. They are somewhat heavily researched by people here in the West that certain cultures tend to do, and it happens, and in many instances, it is very clear to see. There's a corpse. They've marked it with a bit of charcoal behind the ear, or maybe on the cheek, or maybe on the thigh, and then a couple of years, sometimes even a couple of weeks, somebody in the family is born, and there's a birthmark right in the spot where a deceased loved one had an artificial mark put on them. I'll say it again. At least for me, the mind boggles quietly. Lest we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's actually take our time with this one instead of me just throwing a bunch of really interesting, quietly mind-boggling things at you, and talk about past lives, reincarnation. We'll start with the latter, the idea itself of reincarnation. And I'm just going to put this up here right away, right here, right now, because for the sake of brevity and for the sake of this episode, I'm actually not going to talk about Eastern ideas of reincarnation. I know some of you be like, Doug, you jackass, that is insanity. Why aren't you even going to bring it up? You're going to be talking about a lot of these cultures because a lot of the research done by figures you're going to bring up takes place in Eastern cultures and the traditions or religions of Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism. You're not going to talk about karma, Douglas. You're not going to bring up this thing, this word that each and every one of us talk about and use, for the most part, actually incorrectly. Are you a madman, sir? Like, what gives? Why wouldn't you talk about the Eastern conception of reincarnation? And for the most part, I will say, one, I have to save some time. There could be a whole podcast about it. In fact, there are. But for another, is just that here in what we were going to call, huge air quotes, the West, we also have a tradition of reincarnation. Just not very many people know about it. And when people don't know about stuff, that's where I come in. All right, let's think about it, right? The idea of reincarnation, that when we die, we don't really die, that some part of us comes back perhaps into a new body, is probably very definitely ancient. We can't put a pin in it and say like, this at 100,000 BC, we started thinking this. Most likely, we saw the cycles, the natural cycles that occurred around us within, again, air quotes, the natural world. And cycles are very alluring. They're alluring for a reason because we notice them all the time. Such things as cycles within ecosystems and within seasons and within weather patterns, cycles upon cycles upon cycles. No doubt the idea of cycles would get applied to something like human mortality. I have no evidence to back this up, but I would think that the idea of reincarnation is one of our oldest ideas. Probably perhaps as long tenured as we ourselves are. It is an interesting thing to think about. What exactly did our most ancient of ancestors believe happened when we passed away, when our consciousness departs? I would suspect quite a few things, least of which that the idea of reincarnation would be fairly high up there. And this is all part of what is basically called a kind of a personal eschatology that these days we refer to as the survival hypothesis. The idea somehow that when we pass away, that there might be some kind of an afterlife, that the consciousness that we have here now in this waking world goes somewhere. It's not just like a lot of materialists say that, this world is cold and dead and we have this gift of life but once, and then once it's gone for good. I would greatly suspect that all of our ancient ancestors thought somehow that consciousness, when it goes away, it heads somewhere. It's not gone for good. Some aspect of us, recognizable to those who are still alive, survives. It is a popular idea. It is an idea that no doubt provides a great deal of comfort to people. In fact, the idea of a cold, dead universe in which when you die, you just go into the dirt and your worm food is personally very terrifying. Doesn't make a ton of sense to me, not with all the strange shit that I've had happen to me. And of course, skeptics fundamental materialist skeptics would say, well, the very reason that you find it terrifying is probably the very reason why we started to think about something like a survival hypothesis very, very early on in our cultural development. We were, and again, talking about our ancient ancestors, surrounded by death far more than we are right now. In a way, truly, that we just cannot comprehend. And yet, I would like to snap forward to right now. I know this is the history section. It would be wonderful to go chronologically. Yet I kind of want to mention this merely due to the fact that I find it quite interesting and quite telling, particularly at this particular moment. And while we don't have stats as to what people were thinking more than 500 years ago, so we can't say for certain that reincarnation and belief in reincarnation here in the West has always been popular. Right now, and I think the stats are maybe only 3 years old, but as far as afterlife beliefs within North America, negating those who think that just nothing happens, for those who actually believe in things that occur to you after you die, reincarnation comes in at number 2. After the belief in heaven and hell, reincarnation is right there, right after that. About 33 or 1/3 of the population polled believes somehow in a form of reincarnation. And yet again, I don't have stats to go with this, but it's one of those very telling things to me. Not unlike the belief in ghosts, a lot of people who consider themselves to be very agnostic, leaning to atheistic tendencies. A lot of them will say, well, I believe in ghosts. I think a lot of people also kind of do the same. It's like, well, I believe in reincarnation. And why not? Why, right? I think there's something very natural about the belief. And this goes back to, again, what I said not a few minutes ago. Just we see cycles within everything. Why not also in us, in our mortality? For us in the West, of course, we have to go back to them pesky Greeks. You see, the Greeks, they didn't really call it reincarnation. Those words are words we put onto their ideas at a much later date. And there's another word that gets tied in with the ancient Greek belief in reincarnation, and that word is metempsychosis. Hell of a word, I know, metempsychosis. We're not too sure where the idea of a soul passing from one body into another body comes from, or who was the very first ancient Greek to really lock down on this idea. We have a couple of clues, and so I'm going to say that there's no scholarly consensus for the most part. But there are 2 individuals that we like to hone in on, and I'll just basically bring them both up. Because one is said to perhaps have been the student of the other. Anyways, these 2 are Pherenicides of Syros and also the triangle dude himself, Pythagoras. Pherenicides, for the most part, just was basically saying that there is a rebirth that occurs. Once we die, there is a period of time, an intermediate period of time, and then there is a rebirth. I'm going to stick with Pythagoras a bit more because people know a little bit more about Pythagoras. At least I hope his name should be familiar to you. If you've never done like a little bit of just given yourself, 4 days of looking into Pythagoras and Pythagoreanism, it's a fun one. I would recommend it. We don't have any true things that Pythagoras wrote down. All we have are the interpretations of folks that came well after Pythagoras saying this is what Pythagoras said. But one of the things that Pythagoras is said to have said was a recollection that he had lived past lives, and that it was perhaps due to this recollection of past lives that he was able to have such great wisdom. Indeed, his wisdom was directly correlated to being able to remember the many, many past lives he had. Yet again, there is debate amongst scholars in the differences between the separation of Pythagoras and the supposed teachings of Pythagoras, and a very different mystery tradition. The debate is to whether they should be viewed as separate at all, and perhaps one influenced one more than scholars think, and that is Orphism, which were a set of religious beliefs and practices that were ascribed to the mythic poet Orpheus, who went down to the underworld, and he returned. I do not have time to go into all of the wonderful and strange and bizarre details of Orphism or the Orphic religion, the Orphic mystery tradition. Fascinating stuff. Part of the teachings of Orphism is this idea that your soul and the souls of those who believe in this sort of thing is divine and it's immortal, while the body itself is a vessel or kind of like a prisoner. Once we die, the soul is free. It's broken. The vessel is cracked. The soul gets out, and it is a wheel of birth that allows that soul to then imprison itself inside another body. It seems like a pretty unfortunate circumstance, but Orpheus says that if you're a very good follower of Orpheus, make lots of offerings and consider yourself to be a wonderful follower of another god, Dionysus in particular, you make yourself more pure, more pious in the life that you have, then there is a chance that when you die, when the connection is severed once more, there's a better chance that your reincarnation will be higher than it was, in a better state than it was. And if you just keep doing this, you keep getting on that wheel of life and imprisoning bodies and getting better and more pure and more pious and all of that stuff, then you will ascend to live forever with the great gods. While talking about ancient Greeks, of course, we have to bring them up because you just do. And for the most part, when I say that there is a Western tradition of reincarnation, well, metempsychosis to be precise, well, then we have to talk about Plato or Plato or Play-Doh, who knows? I call him Plato. Anyways, Plato is basically where we can point a finger and say that that very definitely looks what we would call a kind of reincarnation. And it's from arguably perhaps his most famous work. I think I would go so far as to say, to the lay person, most people, if they can bring up a work by Plato, they will bring this one up, and that is, of course, Republic. You know, allegory of the cave, the noble lie, philosopher king, that kind of stuff. Sorry, folks, Atlantis isn't in Republic. It's in the other one. It's in Timaeus and Critias. Anyhow, Republic, it ends the very last story within these Socratic dialogues that we call. Republic is a story about reincarnation, in a way. The legend itself is called the Myth of I like... the myth of In fact, while you're listening to this, any time that I just did what I just did there, when I go that's I'm actually paying homage to the myth of In the myth, it tells the story of a character by the name of who was miraculously returned to life on the 12th day after they died. And luckily enough for everybody, he was able to remember what happened before returning to life. And he's able to relate to everyone from the centuries onwards about what happens after one dies and what the secret is of the immortal soul. According to we die, and then we go to this place, a place of judgment, and there's other souls there. And then what happens is that each soul gets to pick. We get to pick a new life. We can go into a human, or we can go into an animal. Once we'd picked, once the souls of the dead have picked what they want to do, whether they want to go into an animal or whether they want to go back into a human, they take a drink from one of the infamous rivers within Hades, or the underworld, which is called the Lethe. Now, once these souls do this, they take a sip of the waters of this infamous underworld river, then they are shot straight straight into a new baby being born. So there you go. That's Plato and the Greek version of reincarnation, metempsychosis. Of course, because there's arguments about everything involving Plato and the dialogues. Is this one of those things where he's actually meaning what he's saying, or is it meant to be allegorical? That followers of Plato and Platonism didn't actually think that this was what was going on. Who's to say? Plenty of debate. Interesting nevertheless, but one cannot say that these stories, and even if they are stories, they are indeed a kind of truth, that such ideas of the rebirth of the immortal soul would have been familiar to people. What happens, though, is because that this stuff is in the water, later authors within what we would call the ancient Greek world, they're bringing it up, and figures such as Homer reappearing or saying to people in dreams that he was once a peacock, and then there's satires done by others. Everyone's having fun with it. We'll probably never know how serious the idea of reincarnation was to those that we consider to be the ancient Greeks. We got to keep moving. And of course, because this is a podcast about magic, we got to talk about Hermeticism. And indeed, there is, when we look at what one could very well call classic Hermeticism, i.e. the texts themselves, or what we consider to be the classic Hermetic texts. In the role of the afterlife for classic Hermeticism, I'm just going to say Hermeticism, reincarnation plays a big role. It has a large role. And while I said that I wasn't going to be talking about the Eastern beliefs of reincarnation, I'll just say that from what we gather from these Hermetic texts, it's very similar to Vedic ideas of samsara and moksha, where within Hermeticism they believe that you're part of this cycle, this wheel of birth and then death and then rebirth, until eventually at some point you break free. Your soul is able to break free of these cycles, and you are reborn in the cosmos and join the Godhead beyond the cosmos themselves. One thing I just really want people to understand, particularly if you've never looked at the classic Hermetic stuff and you're like, oh, I like the idea of reincarnation, maybe I should look into Hermeticism a little bit more. Just understand that they don't think of incarnation, the fact of being in a body, as being a punishment. They just view it as, that's just how things are. For the most part, however, it's different than the Greek version of reincarnation, at least from what we get from the myth of that humans can only be reincarnated into humans. They can't go into animals. But in that mystery cult way that Orphism has, the quality of your life can help dictate what status you get in the next incarnation. Keeping with the trend of esoteric thinking as well, particularly within Judaism, there's quite a huge tradition of the idea of reincarnation within Judaism, particularly within things like Kabbalah and aspects of Orthodox Judaism. One thing that I will talk about, though, that I find very interesting and very cool is a Kabbalistic work that was produced between the 16th and the 17th century, just kind of in the transition between the two. The name of this work is, and again, just please forgive the atrocious pronunciation, Shar HaGilgulim, which translated means the Gate of Reincarnations. It was composed by the main student of an incredibly interesting figure, one who I've talked about a couple of times, Isaac Luria, or Isaac Luria, also known as Arizal. Anyhow, this book is fascinating in the sense that it talks about a Kabbalistic concept called Gilgul, which to our eyes would just be a kind of reincarnation, and just how because the word Gilgul means cycle or wheel, and this work just talks about how the soul goes through different incarnations, through many lives, and how in a way this constant process is in some way related to another concept that I'm probably not the best person to talk about. This is just a kind of repair work within the cosmos and the universe, and within Kabbalah specifically, called tikkun. All of it is extraordinarily fascinating stuff, and the parts of the Zohar which talk about what we would call or consider a kind of reincarnation or a transmutation of souls is one aspect of Judaism. When I was doing research for this episode, that I was actually quite shocked. It's just that there's actually a very long tenured tradition of reincarnation within Judaism. It's brilliant. We shall shift our focus to something that is probably one of the first instances when I was younger of really getting my head around the idea of reincarnation, outside of overly simplified answers that I would get from my parents or teachers. When I would ask about reincarnation, they would normally bring up, well, Hindus believe that when you die, you come back. You could be a human, you could be a chicken, you better be good, or else you'll come back as a chicken, right? And that's basically all I was given. But there was another group of people that I was very, very enamored with within Europe, and those people were the Gauls. I was a huge fan of the comic book series Asterix and Obelix, and because of that, when I was younger, this is probably between the ages of like 8 and 11, I would get books about the Gaulish peoples. Lest I get ahead of myself, let me backtrack and just explain what these are. If you know about Asterix and Obelix, I know you know what I'm talking about. The Gauls were a Celtic people of mainland Europe, in and around the area that we would call France now. And yes, I know I did a whole episode about how problematic the term Celtic is. Anyhow, this specific culture, the ones that we call Gauls, they kind of emerged around the 5th century BC, and they were a going concern basically until a gentleman by the name of Julius Caesar just kind of slowly genocided them over a period of years, and then eventually what we would consider the Gaulish territory was swallowed up by the Roman Empire. Anyhow, there's this comic book about these two lovable characters that were Gauls fighting against the Romans. I absolutely loved them. And yeah, as I said, I would get my dad to go to the library and get me books about Gauls and their beliefs and their culture, or at least what we understood about it. A lot of the people that would write about the Gauls, because they were not a very literate culture at all, are obviously Romans talking about Gauls. And one person who had a lot to say about Gauls is the person that slowly genocided them, Julius Caesar. He's got tons to say about these Gaulish people. Anyhow, I remember getting a book, and it was... when my dad would get me books, a lot of them I admit I didn't read because I couldn't read them. My dad would just get me all of these books, and a lot of them were way over my head for a young age. But I remember one in particular, and I wish I knew the title of it. I'm pretty sure that the information in it is completely obsolete right now, but I remember them talking about how one of these people, one of these Gaulish tribes of people, believed that when you died, you kind of went to this other world. You were reincarnated into like another world that was the flip side of this world that we live in now. And then you spend time there in a new life. And then when you die there, you come back to this world. And over and over and over again. And I'm saying this, please don't quote me that this is what the Gaulish people actually believed. It was just what I read at the time. I found it very, very fascinating. And this is indeed one of the first times where I got a context of reincarnation outside of just the really oversimplified version that my parents and my teachers would give me. And I just thought that was so cool, right? This idea of I live this life, and then I die, and then I go to another place that's kind of like this world. It's like the mirror, bizarro version of this world, and I do things there too. You know, like in this instance, you know, like I'm a snowboarder in this world, but then when I die, I'm a skier in that world. Then I die, and then I come back to the world of being a snowboarder. That's awesome, right? It's Very cool. Okay, so moving on from that, from what we understand about the, again, air quotes, Celtic mainland European tribes, and this also goes a little bit for Germanic paganism, that the Druids within this culture, or at least what we can think that we thought that they thought, mainly due through the Roman writers that were writing about it and recorded this stuff, that there was a very definite belief, an afterlife belief throughout these cultures of reincarnation of some sorts, of a kind of rebirth. And this kind of rebirth would be acted upon, particularly in the funerary traditions of those who had died. There would be letters written that would be burned on pyres when these people would die, that would be read by those on the other side, and that would eventually come back with that information in their next life. But in general, that it was very common, from what we understand, at least from the Roman writings, that these cultures, the main afterlife belief was one of reincarnation. As I said, the Gauls were pretty much basically wiped out. The numbers are staggering, what Julius Caesar did to the Gauls, but it's something like he killed 1/3 of the population and enslaved another third of the population, and the last 1/3 just kind of withered in small tribes, and they just were basically swallowed up by the Roman Empire. Anyhow, from the Romans, we're going to head to a later aspect of that empire itself, and we're going to talk about Christianity. Now, Christianity, universally, they are not for reincarnation. They believe in resurrection. Resurrection is different than reincarnation. Resurrection is, of course, the death of the body and then the resurrection of the same body and the same soul. Reincarnation, death of the body, same soul, new body, right? Does that make sense for everybody? So Christianity, pro-resurrection, anti-reincarnation. But that's not to say that there haven't been little flashes of reincarnation throughout the history of Christianity. The one which comes to mind for me is probably one of the more interesting one, and that is the pseudo-Gnostic Christianity that was cooked up in places like northern Italy and southern France, that we call nowadays the Cathars, and their belief system, Catharism. As I said, the Cathars are a fascinating segment of history, and yes, they are well worth at least a couple of days of research. No time to go into the details of everything that they believed. What I will say is that, to give a very short history to the Cathars, they were kind of pseudo-Gnostic in a way. They were considered heretical to the church and were basically completely wiped out. Systematically so. And by 1350, thousands and thousands and thousands of them were just eviscerated in every way possible. As I said, their belief systems were considered a heresy. One of the aspects of this belief system was an idea of reincarnation. They, for the most part, believed in a place called heaven, or that we would recognize as heaven, but they did not believe that there was a hell. Hell was basically here and now, what we are living in. Cynical, I know. And just in that hermetic way that I talked about earlier, the point of all of this is to try and break free of this constant rebirth and to join God up in heaven, right? This belief, as well as a litany of other beliefs that the groups that we call Cathars believed in, again, marked them out to be heretics of the worst kind, and they suffered for it. Just as a quick little aside here, reincarnation and the interest in reincarnation, as well as an interest in Cathars and Catharism, was invigorated for a little bit within England itself in the 1970s after the publication of a book by a British psychiatrist by the name of Arthur Girdham. He had a patient with extraordinarily intense dreams, and this patient, as they began talking, truly believed that what they were experiencing was some kind of a past life, specifically the past life of one of the last Cathars who was burnt alive. And Arthur came to believe that as well, and he wrote a book about it, and it is called The Cathars and Reincarnation. It's a funny little one. I would say if past lives are interesting to you, as well as late Middle Age history, this book is well worth a read. And there's some very interesting imagery that this patient of Arthur's talks about, just what the Cathars endured. After the late Middle Ages and after the Cathars, the idea of reincarnation was one that just was kind of there in the background. For the most part, all of Europe, and I'm going to say the West, was mainly a Christian place. That was the order of the day. Any kind of thinking otherwise was, it was not advisable. It wasn't until the 19th century where a couple of things happened here in the West that reignited a true interest and many folks truly believing in reincarnation here in the West. The first is the interest in spiritualism and the setting up of the Society for Psychical Research, both in England and in America. William James, a very important thinker, writer, and one would say philosopher in some sense, brought reincarnation to a lot of people's attention. And the other major one, and this is probably the biggest one, and this is probably, I would say, the reason that a lot of people still believe in reincarnation was, again, those pesky theosophists. Man, we live in their world. We truly, truly do. And their interest in Eastern concepts and Eastern philosophies, Eastern traditions, of course, made them very interested in the idea of reincarnation. There you have it. That's basically the Western tradition of reincarnation up to about the 20th century. All right, so the last half hour has basically been me listing traditions and going, yep, they believed. Let's get to the nitty-gritty here because I know that's why you're all listening, right? Past lives. I'm going to talk about two individuals, one very briefly, and the other who I'm going to consider the hero, the champion, the protagonist in this story of past lives. Someone who I actually can say I admire greatly. But before we get there, there's a bit of an elephant in the room as far as past lives are concerned. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that indeed we have to talk about, we have to discuss, and I'm going to discuss it by way of an individual, as I mentioned. And this individual is actually still alive right now. They're still working and they're still doing stuff regarding past lives. His name is Brian Weiss. He is an American psychiatrist. He's also a hypnotherapist. Hypnotherapy has been used for a ton of things, some of them very useful, some of them a little bit more, okay. I have done an episode on hypnosis. It's a very fascinating, very interesting thing. And what I'm going to go through here is I really hope that people don't think that I'm talking down on this. What I will say is that while I do have a podcast that is about magic and the occult, there are certain things that I am very skeptical of. Just because I'm skeptical of something doesn't mean that I can't see that there is a truth in what is going on, nor can I dismiss that what is happening truly helps a lot of people. But on the flip side of that, also sometimes it can cause harm. We are in the world of magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. There is no black and white. There is no dichotomy between true and false. If we remain curious and we remain interested in this kind of stuff, then that is indeed the place where we need to situate ourselves. One of the ways in which folks these days, I'm talking about right now and over the past 30 years or so, have been taking part in a kind of hypnosis called past life regression. That is where the hypnotist helps their patient by basically getting them to calm down, and then they, in a way, go into a deep hypnotic state. And it was from there where they are allowed to talk about things that might arise. And a lot of times what does arise is that they have memories of experiences of past lives. In many instances, these regressions, these memories can be very beneficial to the patient that is undergoing the hypnosis, and it becomes part of their treatment. Modern psychiatry absolutely hates this thing, so immediately I am drawn to it. The major figure again, that the reason that a lot of people know about past life regression and have even gone into it, myself included, for a period of time, is because of Brian Weiss and because of a book that he wrote in 1988 called Many Lives, Many Masters, the true story of a prominent psychiatrist, his young patient, and the past life therapy that changed both their lives. As mentioned, Brian was a psychiatrist, and one of his patients in 1980, by the name of Catherine, that is, of course, a pseudonym. While under hypnosis and deep in hypnosis, this patient, Catherine, started basically discussing past life memories. Brian was skeptical, of course, but then he started to look into the things that this patient was saying, and he found elements of them were actually factually true. This was not some kind of thing where it was just, stuff that could be gleaned from going to the library and looking through a book. These were things that Brian had to go into public records to find, and he said that a lot of what this patient was mentioning was true. The main thing that he honed in on in this treatment of this patient was that there were certain kinds of trauma and anxiety-inducing experiences that they would relate. He began to concentrate on that, and he found that a lot of things like phobias and anxieties were in some way related to these past life experiences that were being related to him, and so he used them in his treatment. To this day, past life regression is still a very, very popular thing. And it is one of those things where, unfortunately, for this episode, I'm going to have to just leave it there because the next episode I'm doing on my Patreon is going to be talking a little bit more about past life regression and Brian's work, but more specifically about my experience in past life regression and a little bit more of my spicy opinions on it. Because, yeah, as I said, for a period of time, I was very interested in this idea of past life regression. So yes, if you're interested in that kind of thing and you want to learn a little bit more about my personal experiences with this kind of stuff and maybe even hear about perhaps, could very possibly be, one of my Douglas's past lives, then Patreon is where it is at. Come on down. You'll love it, truly. We're going to leave Dr. Weiss and hypnotic past life regression there, and we're going to move on to, as I said, the hero of this story. And this is a dude that I'm going to say every single one of you should probably know, but I'm actually going to single out a segment of my listenership specifically. And these are the people that are fairly agnostic about everything that I cover here on this podcast. They just, you find this stuff interesting. I get it, but you don't really think that magic is real, or me doing my silly little rituals can affect reality, that most likely we are indeed living in a materialist universe. It's just that a lot of this stuff just hasn't been explained by science yet. And when it finally is, then, we'll find out that it's not actually magic. It's just, it's mostly psychology. We're mostly just doing sleight of hand with our minds kind of stuff. And for the most part, we've just been slowly chipping away at the ignorance through our science and our discoveries. And that eventually, it's just, we're going to have all of these things laid out for us, and everything's going to be fantastic. Okay, cool, right? I get that you prioritize things like science, talking about science as if it is a monolith indeed. You should know about this dude. You need to know about this guy because he is a scientist's scientist. This is a person that no matter which way you look at his work, despite what he is covering or what he chose to be his life's work, there is almost no aspect of his method or his technique that you can't say, that man is a scientist. I have massive amounts of respect for this person's work, and you need to know him. Allow me to introduce to you the one and only Dr. Ian Stevenson. I know some of you already know this person. Cool, that's awesome. If you don't know Dr. Ian Stevenson and you want to discover for the first time, without my, pithy little summarization of a man's life work that will be basically the remainder of this episode. You want to go in cold and have this man's genius revealed to you? I got a prescription for you, all right? Here's what it is. I love books written by journalists about the kind of thing that I'm very, very interested in. They're some of my favorite things to recommend to people, and I'm going to do so again on this episode. When I did an episode on ghosts, I brought up one of my favorite books about ghosts. written by a journalist called Will Storr. The book itself is called Will Storr versus the Supernatural, One Man's Search for the Truth About Ghosts. It's a classic. I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. It is the book that I actually tell people, hey, you want to know about ghosts in this day and age? Read this book. Well, I have a book that basically does the same for this very topic that I'm talking about today, past lives and reincarnation. And I think if there's one book that you're going to grab, then I would urge you to grab, if you don't know anything about this and you want to know more, this is the book. It's written by a journalist that has massive chops. He was the editor of the Washington Post when they won a couple of Pulitzer Prizes. This is not somebody who was briefly a journalist working for a newspaper in Wilmington, Delaware. This journalist goes by the name of Tom Schroeder, and his book is called Old Souls: Scientific Evidence from Children Who Remember Previous Lives. If everything I have been saying up to this moment of the episode is interesting to you and you'd like to know more, turn it off right now. Go and grab this book and read it. It's short. It's about 230 pages. You can read it in 2-3 days. It covers a lot of territory. It is basically a piece wherein this investigative journalist by the name of Tom Schroeder follows around this Canadian-born but based in America psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Ian Stevenson, who has made it his life and for well over 4 decades collected insane information from children who remember living before they were born. All right, here's your chance to go get that book and read it. Go in cold. It is fantastic. For the rest of yez, what happens in this book? Ian Stevenson traveled the world, particularly places like India, places where reincarnation is the norm. But he was getting older and he was going to retire. And this journalist, Tom Schroeder, asked if he could join Dr. Stevenson on 1 or 2 of his final trips to talk with some previous people that he had seen, previous children who had related some very strange and very fascinating information about their past lives to him, as well as to investigate some new cases. Of course, Tom is very skeptical when they start out. He doesn't believe that there's anything like reincarnation. But then, of course, through the arc of the story and through the book itself, by the time he reaches the end of the book, he is thoroughly convinced that there is a very real phenomenon and that these children are indeed relating real experiences of past lives. Awesome book. Can't recommend it enough. Several points, spine tingles, particularly the end. Very puzzling, very poignant, and very, very touching book. One of my favorites, truly. Allow me to focus in on, again, the hero of this episode itself, Ian Stevenson. He was born on October 31st, that's right, Halloween, in 1918 in the place of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. His dad was a lawyer who eventually became a journalist. That's an interesting transition. But it was his mother who was actually a theosophist. So yet again, theosophies, which means there was lots of interesting books at home. And according to Ian, later on in life, he was a voracious reader. And this would help because he had moments of illness when he was younger, which allowed him to stay at home and just read all of these books. He went to school abroad, I believe, but then came back and finished university at one of the most prestigious universities in Canada, in Montreal, McGill, in 1943. Apparently, he had amazing marks. He was one of the best in his class. Although the sickness that he had had when he was younger never really went away, and his doctor said he needed to get out of the cold climate that is Montreal. If you've ever been to Montreal, indeed, it is very cold there in the winter. So he bounced around for a bit, working in Arizona, and then later got a job at New York Hospital, and then eventually Cornell Medical College, where he was doing research on psychosomatic medicine, particularly cardiac arrhythmias brought on by emotional disturbances. He liked working with people. While he was interested in things like biochemistry, it was all too theoretic to him. He actually liked the personal relationship of talking with living human beings. And when he was doing work with the cardiac arrhythmia, where he'd have patients strapped to ECG machines, he just liked talking to them and getting to know them. What also happened, and this seems to happen with a lot of the kind of interesting heroes within the scientific community, and that crossovers into the paranormal and the supernatural, is that of course, he became interested in the use of hallucinogens, particularly LSD, in trying to help treat people. And he himself did use LSD, as well as mescaline. In fact, he said that mescaline was one of those things that really opened up his perceptions and a different way of looking at things. His interest in the paranormal never went away, and he was always fascinated by things like parapsychology. And eventually, in 1957, when he was 39 years old, he went to Charlottesville, and he became the head of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He would fully admit to the journalist that I just mentioned, Tom Schroeder, that he was always interested in reincarnation, and the idea of reincarnation and its interest to him was instilled from childhood, specifically from his mother, who was, again, a theosophist. While being the head of psychiatry, he began to do the research for which he would be known for the rest of his life, and the university supported his research, and that was he began to start collecting stories and accounts of people who had said that they had experienced past lives. In 1966, he published the book through the University Press of Virginia, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation, and it was a landmark book. He would spend the remainder of his professional career basically traveling all around the world, collecting stories and cases of people who had said that they had experienced past lives, not through something like hypnotic regression. All in all, he would produce 14 books on reincarnation and publish over 300 papers. While at the University of Virginia, he set up what was called the Division of Perceptual Studies, and he would stay as the director of it until 2002. He would live to the ripe old age of 88, and he passed away of pneumonia on February 8th, 2007 in Virginia. And what's very cool is that he has a locked filing cabinet at his former department in the University of Virginia with a combination lock that only he knew, and he was hoping that at some point and in some way that he would be able to pass on the information, i.e. pass on the combination to that locked safe somehow after death. To my knowledge, the filing cabinet has not been opened as of November of 2025. Why is this man important, and why do I consider him a hero, and why is he basically going to be the person who will be brought up for the most part over the remainder of this episode? Well, for one, again, 14 books about reincarnation, right? Over 300 papers on reincarnation. Basically, anybody who is at least in some way an academic that is writing about past lives and reincarnation right now is in some way connected to Dr. Ian Stevenson. What exactly did he uncover in his work? Before we get to any of that, it is very important to know the methodology that Dr. Ian Stevenson used. Because if you are skeptical, you will certainly find some things to be skeptical of. For the most part, he would go to certain places. A lot of the times, particularly at the beginning of his research, he would go to places where reincarnation was considered to be normal. It was considered to be the operant belief system regarding human mortality. These are places like India, Sri Lanka, amongst the Druze people of Lebanon. And he would do that thing that he enjoyed doing. He would talk. And for the most part, he would talk to children. And he would also talk to the families. He would collect as much as he could from what they would say, and he would try to confirm it with information available in the area or through records, through newspapers, as well as through the oral history, being the somewhat recent oral history of the areas in which he was doing the investigation. So yeah, what is going to happen is that, of course, skeptics would hone in on this. There's a lot of anecdotes involved, right? This is not stuff that one can test in a laboratory per se, but the information that they get can be proven through records and things of that variety. It is via the research of Dr. Ian Stevenson that he came up with the CORT. This stands for Cases of the Reincarnation Type. This does not apply to every single instance in the cases that Stevenson researched and investigated, but there were certain things that seemed to be almost standard for the majority of these cases of children that felt that they had experienced a past life. There are 4 main ones that Stevenson singles out, and then a couple of details afterwards, which are a little bit more specific. And to my mind, these are where the more mind-blowing, quietly mind-boggling stuff occurs. But let me go through those 4 main ones. So the first one, of course, being that they're children, right? For the most part, Dr. Ian Stevenson was getting his information from the stories of children, and there's a specific age that they start to relate about experiencing their past lives. And for Stevenson, he locked it down between the age of 2 and 4. And then for some reason, these kids that experience past lives, they just kind of stopped talking about their past life between the age of 6 or 7. One of the most striking features of these main reincarnation types is that a lot of them, the majority of them, talk about suffering a violent death. Stevenson's got numbers. Through all of his cases, he said about 61% of them, that's more than half, relate stories of suffering a violent death. Things like brain injury, horrible accidents, drowning, murder, fires, yeah. And finally, something that Stevenson did notice is that there seemed to be, from these children, a sense that the past life that they had experienced in some way felt incomplete. They seemed to relate about how there was unfinished business, that they weren't ready to be completely gone. What's striking is that Stevenson noticed that this wasn't just in people whose lives had ended prematurely via something like violent death, that some of them who had not still felt like there was something that they needed to do in this world. Some of the more striking features that Stevenson noticed, because those first 4 things, the starting between the age of 2 and 4, ending between the age of 6 or 7, violent death and unfinished business, there's these other things, as I said. These are the ones that are really interesting to me, at least, and this is kind of where I spent a vast majority of my time doing research for this episode, because it's kooky. It's crazy, this kind of stuff. For one, a lot of these kids, when their parents talk to Dr. Ian Stevenson, they would all say that they will often use adult expressions and behave in a way that is very odd for the child. They'll have these weird preferences for things that kids should not have any kind of preference for, specific food tastes, and a lot of times there'll be food tastes, and I'm talking specifically in India here. Stevenson noticed that because India is very class-based, sometimes when there would be children who would say that they had a past life in a family or that was of a different social class, they won't eat the food of the lower class that they are born into. They'll even remark that, this is, I don't eat this stuff. I would never eat this stuff. My past life, this would have been considered garbage, much to the, consternation of these poor parents. A lot of us, and particularly, as I'm a new dad, a lot of times when I'll be with my daughter, with other people, they'll say things like, "Oh, your child seems like an old soul," kind of stuff. And we do use that expression, old soul, a lot, but Stevenson noticed with a lot of these kids that they just displayed stuff that just children should not be displaying. They should not be talking this way. They should not have these attitudes. He also remarked that the way some of these children would sit in their chairs would just be alarmingly like an adult, sitting, bum all the way to the back of the seat, legs crossed, the fingers interlocked and hands resting on the knee kind of stuff. Some of them would wear perfume. They would not wear perfume. Their parents would be like, you don't need that. And they would say, and they'd insist, no, I always wear perfume. Fascinatingly, a lot of times the past lives that these children would relate having would be shockingly close to where they were situated. In some instances, particularly in India, they'd be like a village away or 2 villages away, in which they would tell a story about being in a motorcycle accident and something very specific happening in that motorcycle accident, an arm coming off or something like that. They'd even talk, sometimes these kids would even talk about being from that village, and then they'd do a check, and sure enough, there was a motorcycle accident with very specific details about 17 months beforehand, before the birth of that child. So then that family to that child would go and basically meet the other family. And the child with the past life would show incredible emotional attachment to what they would consider their previous families, to their home. They would recognize, without being prompted, other family members by name, even as specifically as much as something like a nickname. They'd relate stories of things that happened to them in their past life, major instances of family gatherings or a funny situation that happened within that family. And when Stevenson would ask them about this, he would notice in the children that they would get very, very excited and very animated when talking about their previous families. These last 2 are the ones that are really pretty mind-boggling, and that is a lot of times these children will display natural aptitudes for things that they should not have. Being able to read way earlier than they should be able to, sometimes even being able to speak different dialects or languages. Although this was less common in a lot of these cases of reincarnation types, it did happen enough for Stevenson to give it its own name, and he called it xenoglossy. And finally, there's this thing with birthmarks. In fact, this feature is just so striking that he wrote a 2-volume work on it called Reincarnation and Biology, in which he relates how he would constantly encounter on the bodies of the children that said that they had experienced past lives, and particularly for those who had died violent deaths. Frequently, the children would have either a birthmark or a birth defect that corresponds to the wounds or injuries of the previous life. By that I mean, and I'll do this via an example. While in Thailand, Dr. Stevenson was alerted to a case of a young boy who I believe was aged 3 years old. He said that he was the reincarnation, and he remembered the past life of a former school teacher who suffered a extraordinarily violent death. While they were biking to school one day, somebody came out of nowhere and shot them. The boy didn't specify where he was shot, just that he was killed. And it actually correlated to a story of a place not too far away of a school teacher who was riding a bicycle to teach at a school, and somebody indeed killed them. It was while Dr. Stevenson was corroborating this story, in which he was trying to find out how specifically this person died in the past, they found out from the widow of this person that they'd been shot in the head. While they had been cycling, they came to a stop, and then somebody appeared out of nowhere and shot them right in the back of the head. That they basically died instantly. Unfortunately, Dr. Stevenson was unable to get the autopsy report from the police department of this place in Thailand, but again, he was able to talk to the widow, and he was able to talk to several people that were friends with this person that was murdered. And so when he went back to examine the young boy, he found on the top of this young child's head 2 birthmarks. One at the very back of the head that was small and round, and then one a little bit further ahead in the spot where the parietal meets the frontal cranium. This birthmark was very different than the other one. It was large and erratic looking, almost like a splotch. Dr. Stevenson was absolutely astounded by this. It looks like, and for people that are aware of gunshot wounds, usually where the bullet enters, the wound itself is going to be quite small. It's going to be the shape of the bullet itself, so usually it's going to be round. And then it's the exit wound that is always a bit of a blowout, if you'll forgive the graphic nature of my description. But yes, these birthmarks basically looked exactly like what would happen if somebody was healed from a gunshot wound. The birthmark matched the death description of the very exact person that the child said that they were a reincarnation of. There are so many examples of this, and they get more and more bizarre, and they're more and more striking. There's children who tell stories of their past life incarnation having an accident wherein they lose the fingers on their hand. This story is corroborated by Ian Stevenson, and then he notices that the child themselves are born with a birth defect. They were born without any fingers. As I mentioned, of all the things that I did research for this episode, I wasn't expecting just how striking the examples that Stevenson was able to find of these birthmarks and these defects that totally corroborate with the stories. It's insane. It's so striking to me. I have to be clear, though, not every single person that says that they suffered a violent death in a past life has a birthmark or a birth defect that is in some way related, but that there are indeed examples of it. And a lot of times just the coincidence level is off the chart. I'm going to jump in here and basically say I like Dr. Ian Stevenson's work. He is very hard to read just because of how academic and just, it's not hard, it's just dry. He is an academic and he's a scholar. He considers himself a scientist, so it's not the most engaging work. But this 2-volume work that he did on birthmarks and birth defects, which correlate to the stories of past lives and the stories of their deaths, Dr. Stevenson kind of collapsed the two books into a much easier to understand and read book called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect. That was released in 1997. Lots of photos in this one. It's astounding, the accuracy of what is being used as examples in this regard. The information gathered by Dr. Ian Stevenson through the over 4 decades of research that he put into it. For me, I think the what of the information is all there. It's laid out on the table and it's available for anybody with eyes to see. But it was more than anything the how of Dr. Ian Stevenson that I find perhaps the most alluring thing about his research into past lives. Well, certainly Ian's early life was steeped in what we would call the esoteric and the occult due to his mother. At no point did he want to try and prove to everybody his personal beliefs about reincarnation. And any time that he would be asked about his beliefs, he would say, that's none of your business. Well, he'd say it much more kindly than that. He is Canadian. But this was a man who put a premium. There was nothing more paramount to him than scientific study. And he found an area that was very curious, very odd, and worthy of investigation, and he made it his life's work. During his life, and particularly towards the end of his life, there was certainly an amount of bitterness in the fact that he thought that he certainly had important information to share, and a lot of times it would fall on deaf ears as far as the general public was concerned. And while his work was reviewed, in many cases, very positively in medical journals and psychiatry/psychology journals as well, for the most part, his work was ignored. That bitterness, however, did not change or taint his investigations towards the end of his life. He continued to do at every step of the way the same kind of methodology, the same kind of investigations. I'll share a quote here. However impressive, mystical experiences are incommunicatable, whereas scientific observations are and must be communicatable. There is no science without public demonstrability. This means independent verification. And that's what he did. And that's why we are so lucky to have his work and the fact that he was able to do his work. At no point did he tell people to believe everything that he was putting out there. He was just putting the information out there and saying, look at it, test it, investigate yourselves, ask questions. If you think I have missed something, please let me know. As far as researchers within the realm of the paranormal and the supernatural, in my opinion, there is none better, none more rigorous or scientific than Dr. Ian Stevenson. And it is within his research that we see the very sad state of the current understanding of these very important aspects of the human experience. Because it doesn't fit our current paradigm or framework, because it would basically shatter so much of the things that we consider important, there is no space for it. It is not taken as seriously as it should be. I don't want to dwell too long on the criticisms of Dr. Ian Stevenson's work because, of course, there would be, and there would also be questions about the scientific veracity of his method. For the most part, because of the replicability of the things that he was gathering, that's basically nil. And it was also the subjects of his interest, particularly that of children. Throw in the fact that a lot of what they're saying, or a lot of what the families are saying, or where Dr. Stevenson would try to get his corroborating evidence from would be very much anecdotal. Skeptics and critics had a field day with his work, and they continue to. Some of his strongest critics, and I've actually taken the time to read them, are really bad in the sense that they basically resort to ad hominem attacks on the integrity of Dr. Ian Stevenson for even wanting to look into this area initially. Their criticisms basically default to being, this thing can't be true, therefore this man is an idiot. As far as the criticisms of the people that engage with Dr. Ian Stevenson and tell him that they have past lives, there are lots of criticisms that fall back on just the kids telling fantasy stories, and even things so far as trying to provide a way of involving themselves in another family in order to get some kind of advantage. And by that I mean if there is particularly in India, again, there is a lower class family, the parents might try and convince the child to tell stories about their past life in order to involve themselves in a richer family. They just basically say that, oh, this rich family that suffered a tragedy, their son died, well, we just had a son. We will prompt and guide our child to basically say that they are a reincarnation of this grieving family, and then we will be involved with this family. We will somehow get a monetary or societal change within our lives to better our circumstances. Dr. Ian Stevenson was given this critique over and over and over again, and he found that except for one time in the early 70s where this was very definitely the case, for the most part, almost to an overwhelming majority, the children that say that they have past lives, who they say they are the reincarnation of, almost never makes their lives better in any way, shape, or form. In fact, for the most part, and this is something that Tom Schroeder found so convincing in his book Old Souls, it makes people's lives worse, or at least harder. Certainly more confusing and more emotional. It brings up turmoil. Tom Schroeder admits that trying to tease out a child's past life for a lot of these families and the families of the people who they say that they are in some way related to through reincarnation, for the most part, conflict seems to be the inevitable outcome. Why on earth would anyone want to do this? What on earth would cause somebody to try and hoax this? For scientists that want to try and take on the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson and the supposed outcome of his investigation on its own terms, it is very funny that one of the things that happens is that people and other researchers basically say that, well, it's not reincarnation because that can't exist, so it's got to be this other thing. And it's got to be this other incredible paranormal phenomenon. That's the idea of what has been termed super ESP. In that case, that means that these kids are somehow not reincarnations, but that they are all these little psychics. They're psychics that are able to pick up somehow the wavelengths of a death in a town not too far away from where they are and just take all that information into themselves, and then it changes them. It becomes part of their personality, but only for a little while. So it's like it can't be this other extraordinary thing. It's got to be this even more extraordinary thing. Hey, you all know me. I'm not willing to shoot down this idea that in some way that these children might perhaps be picking out on something. Perhaps we really do live in some kind of universe dictated by idealism, that there's just certain rivers and waves of information involving people's lives and the things that they did. There's a residue that somehow children are able to pick up for a little while. I'm not willing to rule that out. But it is very interesting to me that some skeptics can basically say it can't be this thing, but perhaps it is this other thing. For the most part, though, Dr. Ian Stevenson's work stands out as a very, very strong monument to rigorous study and science to look at an extremely particular phenomenon. And as far as Dr. Ian Stevenson's concerned, because he was asked about this kind of super ESP for these children, he basically had the retort that these children aren't psychic in any other way. There's no other way that they're psychic. They're not picking lottery numbers. They're not gaining an advantage in any other way. They're not able to read other people's minds or anything like that. If there's some kind of super ESP, it is so specific to these children that it only applies to true information of people who had died previously. Once more, Dr. Ian Stevenson was not trying to convince everybody of reincarnation or of past lives. He considered it his job to observe, research, collect, and share evidence of a very strange, bizarre phenomenon. One which in a way matched up with a culturally long-tenured, very human tradition, which is reincarnation. That is it. While going through Dr. Stevenson's work, and indeed of the words of other people who knew him and did research with him and who were inspired and influenced by his work, no wonder one would be bitter after 40 years of really doing the thing that scientists are supposed to do. And in this way, it leads me to segue into perhaps one of my least favorite phrases of all time, and one that I think pertains to the situation of past lives, reincarnation, and the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson. And it's one that gets thrown out just so easily, and every time I hear it, I want to throw something at whoever said it, and it is always used to just deflect and deflate. It is known as the Sagan standard, but it is not standard of anything anyways. I'm going to take it apart. It goes like this: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Or to sound less weird, Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What the actual fuck is extraordinary evidence? Is there a standard for what actually constitutes extraordinary evidence? Yeah, it's a cool phrase, sure, but does science right now have some kind of a qualitative, concrete parameter as to what extraordinary evidence could be? Because if one's going to apply it in some way, I'm pretty sure that Dr. Ian Stevenson's research would pass it in flying fucking colors. Are we talking about quantity of evidence? Are we talking about quality of evidence? Where is it? Who draws the line? I really truly hope that history is kinder to Dr. Ian Stevenson than the world in which he lived, because his standards, as well as both the quantity and the quality of the things that he was researching, I would defy anybody to take it on their own terms and not say some very particular, extraordinary phenomenon is happening here. It doesn't have to be reincarnation, but something very odd is going on. And we should probably look into it further. There's something here. It's not nothing. Let's actually go through a case. Let's go through some of the details of, in my opinion, one of the more mind-blowing instances of this whole phenomenon itself. And there's some extra details that make this one a little bit more special for me. A couple of things right off the bat here. One, this case might have been something you've already heard. There was a documentary put out on Netflix not too long ago that covered this case. Another thing is that this is not one of the cases of Dr. Ian Stevenson. It is actually a case of the person who took over from him at the Division of Perceptual Studies within the University of Virginia. That's the department that Dr. Ian Stevenson set up himself. And when he retired in 2002, a child psychologist by the name of Dr. Jim Tucker took over from him and remained as the head of that division until he retired, I believe, in January of 2025. As mentioned, this is a very special case. It is a very bizarre case, and it is one that has had a lot of attention put on it, specifically by critics and skeptics, because the details of this case are almost too good to be true. Let's keep an open mind and let's go through it. So this involves the case of a child by the name of Ryan Hammonds. You see, this boy, Ryan, was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma in 2004. He was late to speaking as a child because he had enlarged adenoids, which are this tissue that is situated between the back of your nasal cavity and your throat. And when he was 4 years old, he had them removed. And once Ryan was able to start speaking, he said some very interesting things. As a note here, his parents did not believe in any kind of New Age ideas. They were strict Protestant Christians. His mother, Cindy, was a deputy county clerk. His father, Kevin, was a lieutenant within the police department. In other words, reincarnation was not on the table. So when Ryan started speaking, one of the things that he would say to his mother is that he said that he thought that he was somebody else. When he would be playing with other kids, he would yell things like, "Action!" and he would pretend to direct them as if he was a director in the movies. At one point, his father, Kevin, was watching an old cowboy movie, an old black and white cowboy movie, and Ryan was kind of telling him what was going to happen next in the movie without ever having seen this movie before. More distressingly, however, Ryan would have nightmares. He would wake up in the middle of the night clutching his chest, basically saying that he couldn't breathe, and telling his mother, Cindy, who would come in to comfort him, that his heart had exploded in Hollywood. His heart had exploded in Hollywood. During the waking day, he would make numerous mentions to Hollywood, saying that he wanted to go there. In fact, he would be insistent that Hollywood was his home. His parents just thinking, kids will be kids, particularly a child who had not spoken for the first 4 years of his life, was excited to start speaking, no doubt would just say a lot of things. What spooked Ryan's mother, however, was the specificity of the things that he was saying. It was Kevin, Ryan's father, who insisted that Cindy begin recording all of the things that Ryan claimed. So this is what Cindy did in a journal. she began to record all of the specific details. He said that he had been an agent in Hollywood and that this agency was known for changing people's names and giving them new names, which they would be famous for. He talked about dancing on Broadway and living in a house with a large swimming pool. His parents were fond of listening to the radio, and sometimes when an older song would come on the radio, Ryan would stop what he was doing, get up, and start tap dancing. He would also make remarks about going to fancy parties with someone he referred to as the cowboy man, who had a horse that performed tricks and was a star of many cigarette commercials. When he began to start school, he would draw pictures of his family, all 4 of them, which was odd because there was actually only 3 of them in the family. When asked who this 4th person was, this 4th figure that would be standing beside Ryan, he would say, "That's the old me." Ryan's nightmares and his exclamation about not being able to breathe and his heart and just generally talking about being scared of death became more and more frequent. Cindy, his mother, not knowing what to do, decided to try and placate Ryan's obsession with old Hollywood, and she decided to go to her local public library and she checked out a few books about the golden age of Hollywood from the days of 1910 to about 1960. While flipping through one of these books with Ryan, Ryan stopped and got extraordinarily excited about a photo. It was a still from a movie made in 1932 called Night After Night. Ryan turned to his mom and excitedly said, "Hey, Mom, that's George. We did a picture together." "Oh, wait, that's me. I found me. That's me right there." Ryan was insistent, and no doubt his mother, Cindy, was quite shocked. The caption to the photo in this book said that the actor themselves was George Raft. The caption, however, did not mention the name of the person Ryan said was him, the person that Ryan said could potentially be their past life. Ryan was very, very excited, and he kept looking at this picture over and over again as the days went on, constantly saying, it's me, I found me." It was not too shortly after this that Cindy decided to reach out to Dr. Jim Tucker at the Division of Perceptual Studies. Once Jim Tucker became involved, things started rolling pretty fast. Ryan Hammond's story started to become one of the more fascinating and strange cases of past lives within the Western world. In fact, Ryan would become the record holder for the number of memories of a previous life related before the previous person was identified. Just who was Ryan Hammond's past life? Jim Tucker was able to hone in on a specific person. It was indeed the same person that Ryan had identified in that photo his mother had shown him, by the name of Marty Martin. Marty was born Morris Kolinsky in 1903 in Philadelphia. His parents were Ukrainian Jews who had recently emigrated to the United States. Eventually, when Morris got older, he moved to New York City, where he was able to sustain himself by dancing on Broadway. His specialty, tap dance. Eventually, he decided to take the trip west, moved to Los Angeles, and he changed his name to Marty Martin. For years and years and years, he attempted to make himself a movie star, to become famous as an actor. But this, unfortunately, did not happen. He did, however, have a lot of very famous friends. One of them, Wild Bill Elliott, a man who had starred in quite a few cigarette commercials, as well as had a horse that could do tricks. His acting career dried up rather quickly. His roles were small, including the role that he had in that film, Night After Night. Eventually, Marty would quit acting, and he would start his own talent agency, the Marty Martin Agency, which became quite successful, and it actually made him very wealthy. Once Jim Tucker had identified this individual, Marty Martin, he was then given access to the journal that Cindy had been recording, all of the details that Ryan had been claiming about his past life. There are a lot of things in this journal. And one of the reasons I think that a lot of skeptics can look at this and say, this is all very iffy, is, for one, of course, it was written by his mother. There is always the chance that she is prompting him to say these things, or she's just done the research beforehand and just filled all the information in and then given it to Jim Tucker. But even if on the basis you don't think that that happened, skeptics can always default to the stats. Here they are. So as of March 2016, Cindy's journal, the thing that she wrote in before she had ever met Jim Tucker, again, Jim got this journal and Cindy was not able to add to it at any point. Cindy had listed about 230 items. These are 230 claims made by Ryan about his past life. The vast majority of these claims, that is 69.5% of them, were unverifiable. They are just things we will never, ever know. 6.5% of the claims made are incorrect, just completely wrong. However, 24%, that is a quarter of the claims in this book, are 100% verified as accurate. So yes, there are a lot of things that cannot be proven. There are things that are definitely 100% wrong, but 1/4 of the things listed in this journal are 100% true. Things like living in a house with a swimming pool, the fact that Marty Martin hated cats, Ryan said that he had a large green car, even the fact that he died at the age of 61. There are many, many more. I will have a link in the show notes to just all of the small details that Ryan got correct about Marty Martin's life. It's funny because it's pretty mundane, but just the magnitude of them is indeed very, very striking. 47 of the 230 items. One odd piece of information that was quite wrong in Ryan's recollection of Marty Martin was the way in which Marty passed away. Again, Ryan would have terrible nightmares saying something along the lines of his heart exploding, whereas from what we know, Marty Martin died of a brain hemorrhage. There are a few other stats that don't go exactly great for Ryan Hammond's case, particularly in a photo recognition test that Jim Tucker did with Ryan. Only about 3 out of 5 were considered to be successes, although he did recognize very specific people that he had referred to by name and recorded in a journal. Somebody by the name of Senator Five. When one of these photo recognition tests was given to Ryan, he pointed at a person and said that they looked very familiar to him, and that person ended up being Senator Irving Ives, a senator from New York during Martin's lifetime. Ryan also showed some other interesting behavior in the sense that when I mentioned earlier the idea of super ESP and Dr. Ian Stevenson's objection to it being super ESP and basically saying that if these kids are psychic, why are they only psychic about a specific person in the past? Ryan was different. Ryan actually showed some kind of other psychic ability. He seemed to know information about his mother's family, secret information that they had never talked about. He would be able to tell when certain house appliances were about to break, including one time his father's watch. Apart from this other psychic ability and from his past lives, Ryan was a fairly normal child, and just like other cases wherein there are people with past lives, as they begin to get older, the memories and the instances in which they bring up these past lives begin to dim. Ryan Hammonds is now 21 years old. When he was last checked into via an interview, he basically said he doesn't think about his past life anymore. He did mention through his late adolescence and later teenage years, he, for some reason, really enjoyed watching old movies and enjoyed listening to big band music from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But otherwise, it seems like Marty Martin is as he was before Ryan Hammonds was born. Somewhat forgotten. To be sure, there's just so much more about this case of Ryan Hammond's and Marty Martin that I just have not had the time to go into. More than anything, one of the reasons I gravitate to this story and why I decided to share it with you is that I just find it absolutely puzzling. It is certainly exciting. Some may even say it's somewhat sensational. When encountering it for the first time, hopefully you find it exciting and compelling, but also that within this story, there is definitely, without a doubt, much to be skeptical about, which I have found through doing the research for this episode is indicative of pretty much every single case of children who claim to have past lives. They're not airtight. There are so many things that one can poke holes through in these stories, and yet there are other details that just, well, normal explanations do not seem to do justice to the data. I shall repeat myself. There is something going on here. It's not nothing. But what is going on? Indeed, what are the major things that perhaps could somehow explain this phenomena itself? Is it actually, indeed the topic of this episode, is this actually reincarnation? Is this actually past lives in some way? I think for me, perhaps one of the biggest parts of the puzzle, and indeed something that is beyond puzzling to me, but in some way strangely poetic, is the geographical aspect of a lot of Dr. Ian Stevenson's subjects. Not so much in the sense that, the cultures that believe in reincarnation tend to have stories of past lives, like the geographic location of the country of India. I'm referring specifically to the strange closeness geographically to a lot of these cases. A lot of the cases, particularly in places in the East, but this is also very common within the culture of the Druze in Lebanon, that the children that say that they have experienced a past life, the person for whom they claim to be a reincarnation of in some way is geographically usually very close. As I said, sometimes like a village away or less than 100 miles away. And it seemingly happens more and more with violent death cases. And I say the word poetic because, I don't know, just as I was reading case after case after case of someone claiming to have had something happen to them in a past life, and they find out that it's actually very close and very similar to a person located in a city that is not that far away, maybe a few hours drive. There's something about this phenomena that just seems to me as if a violent death is just like blowing the seeds off a dandelion, and this soul will just fly away, and then eventually, somehow, one of these seeds or lives takes root in someone. It just doesn't have very far to go. Whatever reincarnation wind takes these things, it doesn't carry them very far at all. In a way, it seems, and this is just, again, my own interpretation, it just seems like perhaps the reason for that is because of the whole unfinished business of a life unlived, a life cut short, a potential snuffed by a violent death. And the souls go off and settle not too far away. Ian Stevenson, again, was not trying to convince anybody of anything, at least in the sense of what he truly believed was going on. He was just trying to share his investigations and his research. But there are others that he had worked with and who he had influenced that have, in a way, taken up the mantle and actually come up with some kind of theories as to what could perhaps be going on. Some of them are more interesting than others. I'd like to share one of them, and this was somebody who has used a lot of the research of Dr. Ian Stevenson for his research and his ongoing research and his ongoing investigations and his ongoing theories, and that is a gentleman by the name of James G. Matlock, who is actually not a psychiatrist like a lot of the others. He is an anthropologist, so he's got a different place from which he draws his context and his understandings. James is still alive. He's still writing, and I will have a link to one of his books, Signs of Reincarnation, in the show notes to this episode. Anyhow, James has come up with what he calls the processual soul theory. How this works is James takes 4 concepts that are seemingly different, and he kind of squashes them together. That is the mind, or consciousness, or stream of consciousness, or psyche, or even soul. He basically uses those terms interchangeably. But he says that these are composed of 2 things. And he actually goes off the work of somebody who is a bit of a hero of mine. That would be Frederick Myers, one of the founders of the Society for Psychical Research. Anyhow, what James Matlock says, this, let's just use the term soul, is composed of are 2 parts. The first part is the supraliminal mind. What this mind is the mind that you are most likely going from now. That's your waking consciousness, unobscured by things like drugs, just the plain waking consciousness. And then the other part of the soul is the subliminal mind. As we go about our day, our daily lives, we have the information that we glean and obtain from experiences that we have each and every day of our lives, be they strong or be they mundane, as well as other things that we have acquired over time, things like skills, preferences, things such as habits, even emotions, as well as just the memories of things that happened to us. Not only that, but the physical acts and things that have occurred to us. All of these things are kept in the subliminal mind somehow. They're kept there permanently. This part of you, this is what survives, the subliminal mind. All right, the next part here gets a little bit complex, but everybody hang with me. I'm going to quote exactly from James himself. What he says is that the subliminal mind customizes each new body, i.e., each new baby, each new person, reincarnated, by psychokinetic actions affecting the genome, tissues, brain, and physiological aspects, while the supraliminal mind undergoes a reset upon coming into association with each new body, losing the ability to retrieve remembered information from prior to the start of the new life. In other words, it's a process, obviously. That the way that we have been thinking about reincarnation is in some way correct. There are aspects of what we can call the mind or the soul that survive, that seemingly carry forward somehow. That being said, the mechanism via which how this occurs is something that James is not able to prove in any way, shape, or form, nor pretty much probably anybody in the immediate future, at least. At this point, the mechanism via which this occurs is, if you'll excuse the word, magic. I find this hypothesis, I find it an interesting one. In a way, it has a nice little flecks of some kind of an evolutionary advantage as to why this is occurring, although that is opening up a whole nother can of worms. Others who carry on the work of Dr. Stevenson, some of them will evoke the words quantum theory, and there's so many different theories about what could possibly be going on. To me, the theories are the least interesting part of this. The most interesting part has always been the phenomena itself. Well, the phenomena and its interaction with the most important element. That's us. the very possibilities that this could in some way be very true. That the story of us has never, ever just been the story of ourselves. It truly has been the story of us. You and me and every single one of us doing this over and over and over again. While doing research for this episode, it is in a way really colored in a really nice, comforting way. Anytime I find myself waiting in a line, sitting in a doctor's office, even taking a bus to just look around and see these other people that to me were a few months ago, for the most part, were just other people, still special, still important. But now looking at them, I want to see continuing embodied stories from the very beginning of us. In each one of these episodes wherein I cover something that's a little less than obviously related to the world of magic and the occult, I always towards the end try to convince my listeners of why they should be interested in this topic itself. You know, I did that with ghosts. Why magicians should be interested in ghosts, or UFOs. Why magicians should be interested in UFOs. And I have a bunch of notes in front of me here, things I thought would be nice to say to magicians and people interested in this kind of stuff as to why past lives and reincarnation should be interesting to you too. There's these things. I wrote them down. They don't really look very convincing, truthfully, now that I say. I don't think I need to try and convince you, a person who is interested in magic and the occult and the esoteric, as to why the idea of past lives and reincarnations should be something that you're interested in. Indeed, should be on your radar. It should be something that you take time away from, I don't know, looking at the consecrations for the tools in a 16th century grimoire. Why step away from that and actually read some of Dr. Ian Stevenson's work? I can't right now endeavor to try and do that. These kind of topics, specifically this topic, more than anything else that I have covered up to this point of What Magic Is This Podcast, the nearly 6 years that I've been doing this show. This one, the lessons and the interest and the introspection and the perspectives that one can abstract and or feel deep within themselves are very personal. What I can say is all of this leaves me pondering the implications of what would occur if suddenly, out of nowhere, let's say the scientific majority actually takes a look at the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson. They take a look at the work of James Matlock and Jim Tucker and others, and they finally just say, hey, look, you know what? We were wrong. There is something here. And we get to a point wherein we here in the West say, you know what? Something is happening. We somehow survive bodily death. Earlier in my life, I would have been quite idealistic about this outcome. I would have thought that it was a great thing. Finally, this thing that I know in my bones to be true is now the thought of everybody around me. Everybody now knows that we somehow survive death. I would then think about all of the possibilities as a society and as a culture of what this would afford us. If we are not subject to any earthly power, then we would be brave enough to fight for things like freedom and major social justice issues. All of the pain and the fear that we have as we come towards the end would be dissipated. This would be a joyous occasion. We could view our life as a beautiful journey. It would allow us to be able to prioritize the most meaningful aspects of our lives and concentrate on those, each and every one of us, to bring some sense of harmony to a culture I fear has squeezed out so much meaning from the world. Nowadays, however, I find I have pangs of deep cynicism. We almost seem unmoored by any kind of obligation to anything besides the pursuit of money. Any aspect of our subjective worldview has been basically squashed. Most people, indeed our society, views the subjective world with contempt. Indeed, a society that prioritizes and puts only the objective as being the only things with importance, but somehow is able to account and make room for the idea of reincarnation in past lives, that world, that culture could do terrible things. For the most part, would belief in reincarnation, would it make you more human? Would your compassion for others be strengthened? Your compassion for the spirits, for the beauty and the agency in which I seemingly see all around me, and I'm so excited to share with each and every one of you when I can? Would that grow if these things were to be made true to you? If you knew you had the potential to continue to live once again, could you see this as a way in which you could grow? Or do you think, as I do sometimes, that such a belief would give many, maybe even some part of my past self, a get-out-of-jail-free card? It does not matter how I treat myself or others. I could do better next time, but for this one, why should I? There's a very funny moment shared in the book Old Souls by Tom Schroeder, wherein Dr. Ian Stevenson is sharing his ambition with a mystical teacher, a Swami in India. This is what Dr. Stevenson had to say. I told him about my work and how I thought it would be quite important if reincarnation could be proven, because it may help people to lead more moral lives if they knew they would come back after death. There was a long silence, a terrible silence, and he finally said, "Well, that's very good, but here, reincarnation is a fact, and we have just as many scoundrels and thieves as you do in the West." Personally speaking, I tend to oscillate back and forth. I try to direct myself towards the good. But also, perhaps there is some part of me that thinks that perhaps we as a culture need to think that we only get one life. Perhaps we absolutely need to believe this, that we only get one crack at this, that by believing such a thing, it could perhaps shake us out of our complacency when things get very dire, when ideas and processes are not working for us any longer. But here's the thing. I don't think we are stupid. I think that we know in our hearts that we are in some way immortal, and that somehow, in some way, we can come back. Some aspect of us returns. Perhaps the only thing we need now is to be honest with ourselves, that immortality doesn't tarnish just how special and important life is. Being immortal adds to this. It magnifies it. And I cannot help but think of the butterflies once again. This could be our course, an ongoing cooperation, that as we move towards where we're supposed to be, that we need to end and begin and end and begin and realize this is what we've always done, because this is us. And there's still so much more to look forward to. Okay, everybody, That's about all I have to say about that. And I do want to leave people, though, with a couple of other names, because while this episode has been very heavy on the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, as well as the work of Dr. Jim Tucker, as well as James Matlock, there's some other folks that I would be remiss to not bring up. Two of Dr. Stevenson's proteges, one would be Erlendur Haraldsson, as well as the always awesome Satwant Pasricha. Their work and their research papers are excellent. And lastly here, I want to bring up the work of Antonia Mills. Her work is a little bit closer to where I am geographically situated here in Western Canada. Her research, for the most part, focuses on reincarnation beliefs and past lives experienced amongst the First Nations in Western Canada. Exceptional, very interesting. As mentioned, this is a huge topic. One could literally take this as a momentary interest and could carry on looking into it for the rest of their life and perhaps a couple of lives after, if you know what I'm saying. Astoundingly interesting stuff. All I can say is that I had an absolute blast looking into this thing and have been over the last little while. It has been so great to just be learning new things that I'm almost completely unfamiliar with, and to just be able to, once again, read into certain studies and certain books and just have my jaw hit the floor when I learn some absolutely astounding information. It's been lovely. It's been great. As per usual, I will have tons of links and book recommendations on the website that I have for every single episode I do here at What Magic Is This. You can find that at whatmagicisthis.com. Seriously great show notes on this one. Well worth diving into if this has been something you find fascinating and interesting. I spend absolute hours curating those show notes and those book recommendations. I would not be putting them there if I did not think that you could get something from them. So please, please, please check them out. I just do so much work on them. And they're yours. Do with them what you will. If you think that I'm doing something somewhat special here with What Magic Is This podcast and you would like to show your support in some way, I will tell you the ways in which you can do this very thing. The first way is the absolute best way, and that is by supporting me on Patreon. That is patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com and find any number of the support my work on Patreon buttons and links that I have there. Basically, what happens is that I only have one tier, and it's $7 a month. That's all I'm asking. That price has not changed once through the over 5 years that I've had the Patreon, and it basically gives you access to an entire other podcast. I have episodes on almost anything that you can think of within the milieu of magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. Things like book recommendations and books that I think should be very important to you, to episodes about specific deities, saints, angels, demons even. I have videos that show you how to do certain things that I think should be fairly important to anybody that wants to practice magic, as well as personal stories of things that are going on, including the one that shall be posted on the heels of this episode, in which I talk about Brian Weiss and his hypnotic regression, and perhaps you get to hear what could very possibly be a past life that I was able to excavate while doing a guided meditation. Anyways, that should be following this episode pretty shortly on my Patreon, but other things that I have there as well. You know me, I like to share stories, and preceding this very podcast episode you are listening to now, I shared a fantastic true story involving an investigative journalist whose work mainly dealt with the paranormal and the supernatural. In fact, they had even authored a book about reincarnation that had a foreword in it by the Dalai Lama. What happens in the story, though, is that he goes to these mediumistic channeling sessions, and through a channeler, he believes that he has made contact with a spirit guide that was a lover of his in a past life named Philippa. The story goes in many interesting and surprising directions. which eventually lead to him writing a fantastic book. I have a small snippet of this episode that I would love to share with each and every one of you. So here is a small 5-minute sample of that episode. I hope you enjoy. Have a listen. By his own admission, when Joe finally had a chance to speak with Philippa for the first time through Aviva Neumann, he was very unimpressed. This voice that came forth seemed simple. They seemed not that bright. Their words were very cautious, and Joe certainly did notice that there was a very odd accent, partially Greek, for he had spent some time in Greece on holiday years before, but that this voice seemed like they almost in a way didn't know what they were saying. Their words seemed very fragmented. And yet through Joe's continued sessions with Roger and Aviva, talking to this voice, Philippa, eventually a reciprocal communication began to form. A bond began to form. It was only a matter of months before Philippa became, without a doubt, the most important thing in Joe Fisher's life. Joe would spend hours and hours talking to his spirit guide, where, giving each other nicknames, Philippa would regale Joe with the things that they did through many previous lifetimes, because they were lovers, not just 300 years ago, but centuries and centuries before. And although the term was never used in Joe's book, the best way of encapsulating it is that Joe felt that this guide that he was talking to, Philippa, was his soulmate, the one that he had always gone to, not just in the life that he was experiencing currently, but many, many lifetimes before. Yet Joe was not just doing these sessions for nostalgic remembrances, as wonderful as they were and as meaningful. Joe talks about these sessions as being the greatest thing to happen to him in his entire life up to that point. Joe had a job to do. He needed to investigate what exactly was going on. Philippa had remarked that she was always with Joe, even when she wasn't talking through Aviva Neumann, and that Joe should try to communicate with her in his day-to-day life. And Joe attempted over a period of time to do so. And while it did take quite a number of months before Joe felt that he could do something to just gain an inkling of the communication or presence of his past life lover, he would take what little evidence he had and go back to a session to talk with Philippa through Aviva to see if indeed he was able to talk to her outside of the specific situation of Aviva's trance state. Joe was absolutely astonished that when he felt during the day that he had some small contact with Philippa, he would go to Aviva, get Philippa on the line, and say, "Hey, Philippa, I felt you today. Did you feel anything?" And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, Philippa would say yes. "Do you remember when you were trying to climb a hill today, and I told you to almost imagine that your feet are going into the air, climbing into the air as if you are in some way flying, that my words made it easier for you to climb this hill? Did you feel this, Joe?" And Joe was absolutely astonished that that was indeed the communication that he had received earlier that day when he was out long distance running. Earlier that day. These sorts of investigations would continue, and they would continue to confirm in Joe's mind that something paranormally exceptional was occurring with these spirit guides and with this trance medium communication. But unable to help himself, while the investigation was a large part of what was going on, more than anything, Joe began to truly believe and prioritized the relationship that he felt he had and was continuing to have with this past life lover. It was the most important thing in his life, more important than his job, and definitely more important than his current girlfriend, who, unsurprisingly, left Joe not too long after Joe had been telling her the sorts of things that Philippa and talking with her made him feel. As these sessions continued for months and months and months, Joe was noticing a very discernible change, and he didn't know if he was able to, in a way, stay objective about it. In his own words, Joe says, "It was an addictive process. The more counsel I received from the guides, the more I wanted. But there were times when their counsel left me shaking my head in disbelief. It didn't quite make sense that while stressing the importance of free will, they should intervene physically and emotionally in our lives. We will not impose upon you," said Aviva's spiritual guide Russell. Yet by their own admission, they had imposed upon us. There you go. That's a little sample of the kind of story that I do over on Patreon. But as I said, there's just so much there, and it's all really wonderful. It's all really great. It's basically a whole new show. It's a whole podcast unto itself. In my opinion, all of my best work, for the most part, is over there on the Patreon. It is truly a special thing. And again, it's only $7 a month. I would greatly appreciate it if you could see your way to supporting me if you enjoy what I do here on What Magic Is This podcast. It is by far the best way of supporting what I do and keeping this as my career, as my day job, being able to do all of the research, to formulate these shows and get them to you in a somewhat timely manner. Once again, patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com. Click on any number of the support me on Patreon links there. I would really, truly appreciate it. Again, once more, $7. That's basically nothing. All right, another way of supporting me is through PayPal. Easy way of doing that, head to whatmagicisthis.com. Click on any number of the PayPal buttons that you see there. You know, the two Ps, they're kind of one shade of blue and then another shade of blue. And any amount helps. It all goes into paying for this podcast, truly. Hosting costs, subscription fees, filters for the show to sound the way that it does. There's quite a receipt for having this podcast each and every month. So if you donate on the PayPal, that just goes straight into paying for that. Any amount is appreciated. Hey! Do you like buying books? I know you do. Well, now you can buy books and help support my show. You see, what I have is a virtual bookstore did I just say bookstore? Bookstore. I've got a virtual bookstore that does a couple of things. Here's how it works. I run it through bookshop.org. What they are is an organization that supports a ton of independent bookstores all across North America. Say I mention a book here on the podcast, and you're like, I would really love to buy that book and support Doug and support these independent bookstores. So what you do is you head to my bookstore, or you go to the individual episode webpage on whatmagicisthis.com for that episode, find the book that you want, click it, it'll go right to my bookshop, you buy that book, and everybody wins. You get a book, the independent bookstore has a sale, and I, for recommending the book to you, get a small commission. It's about $1 or $2 depending on how much the book actually costs. It's awesome. It's wonderful. I've ordered books for myself. I've ordered books for other people. Nothing could be better. Truly, everybody wins. And as I recommend a ton of books, particularly in this episode, I recommended some really awesome ones. I would love to see you get some of these books into your hand and you helping out those independent bookshops, as well as, helping me out a little bit as well. So what to do, head to whatmagicisthis.com, find my link. If you just scroll down anywhere, that's also in the menu there, you'll find the What Magic Is This bookshop. Or you can head to bookshop.org/shop/whatmagicisthis and grab yourself some titles. And hey, Christmas is coming up. What could be better than getting somebody a book from the virtual What Magic Is This bookshop. The final way of supporting me is by grabbing yourself some merchandise. Head to whatmagicisthis.com, go to the little menu there, click on that. You'll see a merchandise button, click that, and it is hosted through Tea Republic. There's about, I think, 12 or 13 designs there. A lot of the designs are done by yours truly. You can buy mugs, you can buy tote bags, you can buy t-shirts, there's hoodies there, there's throw pillows, all kinds of great swag. Grab yourself something. I don't see a lot of money from the merchandise, but I absolutely get a ton of satisfaction. If you do grab one of these bits of merchandise and you put it on, please send me a picture. It's just the coolest thing to see people wearing my stuff. And I just recently saw somebody, without any kind of prompting, somebody on Instagram was wearing one of my shirts, and it made my day. Every single time it happens, it makes my day. I absolutely love it. But as I said, not the best way of supporting me, but it is a fantastic way of, advertising your love for the show. Somebody will see you wearing a What Magic Is This t-shirt, and you'll just tell them about how awesome the show is. It is a grand and glorious thing. But with all that being said, once more, the best way of supporting What Magic Is This, your personal favorite podcast, is by heading over to the Patreon and supporting me there. It is very cheap, it is very affordable, and it gives you oh so much. I would absolutely love to have your support. There is certainly a lot to go on from this episode, and even if this was not exactly your cup of tea, I really hope that you found something within here that piqued your interest in some way or made you think something other than what you normally think. I myself found this a very challenging and exciting thing to research. As I said, I have been learning things that have been quietly boggling, things that I am bringing into my life and making it a much richer experience. I've always known in some way that we are immortal and that there is much more to this universe than just accepting that when we pass away that we go nowhere, or even that when we pass away that we go somewhere else. There is really something to sit with, something comfortable in some way, knowing that perhaps we come back here. We get to do this again somehow. Or perhaps it is not all we've cracked it up to be. Perhaps the way that we have contextualized past lives and reincarnation is but one dim reflection on a far more profound and complex process. Maybe past lives and reincarnation are at this point the only way that we can contextualize something that we just don't understand. If there's one thing that I carry with me a bit more than I have previously, it is the want to try and be a good person, to try and be as kind as I can, to help as much as possible when there are those who need the help. Not for fear of some kind of karmic retribution or anything like that. No, this thing that we have, this thing that we all share, is oh so special. And while some days it might seem like we're just not getting it and we're just not seeing how special it is, well, guess what? It might appear that you and I and everyone have an eternity to get it right. All right, everybody, that's it for this one. Until next time, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay luminous. Ta-ta for now.